Humiliated on stage, a desperate singer was dragged away in handcuffs, her dreams shattered as her daughter watched. But from the darkest VIP box, a stranger's obsidian eyes had sealed her fate. Now, this ruthless mafia boss has saved her opera, crushed her enemies, and claimed her with a possessive, dangerous love. She escaped one nightmare, only to awaken in his golden cage. What price will she pay for his absolute protection? The Starlight Opera House was dying. Alara Vance knew it in the way the plush velvet seats, once a vibrant ruby, now sagged with the dull, bruised purple of decay. She felt it in the whisper of dust motes dancing like forgotten spirits in the meager sunlight that pierced the grimy skylights. And she heard it in the mournful creak of floorboards beneath her worn ballet slippers, each sound a tiny, suffocating sigh from the grand old dame she fought so desperately to save. Tonight, the silence was deeper, heavier, pressing down on Alara's chest like a tombstone. It was well past midnight. Lily, her 7-year-old sister, was tucked away in their makeshift apartment behind the stage, her soft, even breaths a precious, fragile counterpoint to the opera house's fading heartbeat. Alara had just finished patching another rip in a moth-eaten curtain, her fingers, usually nimble and expressive on a piano, now stiff with fatigue and the faint sting of needle pricks. A smudge of grease paint still clung stubbornly to her cheek from the children's rehearsal she'd led hours ago. Another hat she wore, along with seamstress, cleaner, makeshift teacher, and reluctant fundraiser. Her reflection in the darkened stage mirror was a stark caricature of her 26 years. Dark circles under eyes that should have sparkled with youthful ambition, hair scraped back in a utilitarian bun, a thin, almost translucent quality to her skin. The face of a woman running on fumes, driven by a relentless, consuming need to protect. Protect Lily. Protect this place. This place. Alara's gaze swept across the empty auditorium. Rows upon rows of seats, waiting. The ghosts of applause, of soaring voices and orchestral swells, seemed to hang in the chill air. Once, the Starlight had been a beacon, a temple of artistry. Now it was a desolate shell, a beautiful corpse that refused to lie down, held upright by her sheer, trembling will. A crumpled envelope lay forgotten on the stage manager's battered desk, a splash of stark white against the dark wood. It was the latest foreclosure notice. The words, though familiar, still twisted in her gut. Final warning. Imminent seizure. Property to be redeveloped. Silas Thorne. The name itself tasted like ash on her tongue, conjuring images of his predatory smile, his eyes that promised ruin. He wanted this land. He didn't care about the peeling frescoes, the perfect acoustics, or the generations of dreams woven into its very foundation. He saw only profit. Alara picked up the notice, her fingers brushing over the formal, cold type. A phantom ache bloomed in her temples. How much longer could she fight? Every day was a fresh battle against leaky roofs, overdue utility bills, dwindling donations, and the constant, suffocating pressure of time running out. She had pawned her grandmother's engagement ring last month, the last piece of true value she owned, just to cover a plumbing emergency. The small, gold band, a symbol of enduring love, had felt heavy, a sacrifice that tasted like defeat. She closed her eyes, trying to conjure the image of her parents gone too soon, who had poured their lives into this theater. They wouldn't have given up. But they hadn't faced a foe like Thorne, a man who moved through the city's underbelly with the ease of a serpent, whose connections seemed to reach everywhere, dangerous and unseen. A tiny, muffled cough from their backstage apartment brought her back to Lily. Her sweet, vibrant Lily. Lily whose laughter still echoed in these vast halls, whose tiny feet pattered across the stage every morning, dreaming of pirouettes and grand finales. Lily, who deserved so much more than a life shrouded in the dust of forgotten glory and the shadow of constant fear. Alara walked to the edge of the stage, gazing out at the cavernous space. The wooden floor, scuffed and scarred, bore the imprints of countless rehearsals, of triumphant leaps and devastating falls. She inhaled deeply, drawing in the mingled scents of old wood, stale dust, and the faint, enduring perfume of long-gone theatrical magic. It was her sanctuary, her burden, her prison. Slowly she raised her head, a silent strength uncoiling within her. Even in the deepest abyss, a melody could still be found. She began to sing, her voice a rich, raw soprano, filling the empty space. It wasn't an aria of triumph, but a lament, a plea, a fierce declaration of resistance. Vici derde vici d'amore, she sang the words from Tosca. I live for art, I live for love, echoing with a profound, aching resonance. Every note was a desperate prayer, a testament to her unending fight, her unyielding spirit, even as despair gnawed at her edges. Her voice soared, climbing higher and higher, a defiant, haunting sound in the immaculate silence, each high note a desperate grasp for a lifeline. She poured every ounce of her exhaustion, her love, her fear, and her fierce hope into the melody. The sound bounced off the velvet drapes, caressed the high ceilings, and seemed to awaken the sleeping spirits of the theater. As the final, lingering note faded, leaving only a shimmering echo, Alara stood utterly still, her chest heaving. She felt exposed, vulnerable, yet strangely lighter, as if she had shed a piece of her soul onto the stage. For a brief, blissful moment, the threat of thorn, the specter of foreclosure, the weight of her responsibilities all receded. There was only the purity of her voice, her art, her love. Then a faint, almost imperceptible click echoed from the darkest corner of the auditorium, from the high-shadowed VIP box that rarely saw occupants. Alara's breath hitched. She hadn't been alone. Her heart, already trembling from the intensity of her song, now hammered against her ribs with a new, dangerous rhythm. She spun around, her eyes wide, straining to pierce the gloom. Was it a trick of the old building? A settling beam? Or had someone truly been listening unseen to her most private, desperate plea? The silence that followed was not empty, but heavy with an unknown presence, a chilling awareness that her vulnerability had just been witnessed. And as she stared into the impenetrable darkness of that VIP box, a sense of inevitable doom, mingled with a sliver of terrifying curiosity, prickled at her skin. The Starlight Opera House glittered, transformed. Tonight, it wasn't a dying monument, but a resplendent, if temporary, beacon. Crystal chandeliers, polished to a brilliant sheen, rained fractured light across the faces of New York's elite. The air, usually thick with dust, was now a heady blend of expensive perfumes, aged whiskey, and the faint, sweet scent of lilies adorning every table. The murmur of polite conversation, the clink of silverware against fine china, created a sophisticated hum that filled Alara with a fragile sense of hope. This was it. The gala. Their last, desperate chance. Alara stood backstage, her heart thrumming a frantic rhythm against her ribs. The heavy velvet curtains felt rough against her palms. She wore a borrowed gown, a simple sapphire blue that somehow, miraculously, made her feel less like a weary caretaker and more like the artist she was born to be. The stage lights, hot and blinding, beckoned. This was for Lily, for the opera house, for every impossible dream she still clung to. "You're on, Alara," the stage manager, old Mr. Henderson, whispered, his voice raspy with nerves. She took a deep breath, the scent of stage dust and anticipation filling her lungs. Then she stepped into the light. A ripple of polite applause greeted her, the sound a distant, muted wave. Her eyes swept across the faces in the audience. Investors, patrons, the city's power players. They held the fate of the starlight in their hands. She began to sing. It was an aria from Verdi, a piece rich with both sorrow and unyielding passion. Her voice, usually so vulnerable in the quiet solitude of the empty theater, now soared, filling every corner of the grand hall. It was pure, unfettered, resonating with the very soul of the opera house. She poured every ounce of her being into it, her love for Lily, her fierce dedication to this crumbling sanctuary, the agonizing fear of its impending loss. The notes swelled, painting vivid pictures of forgotten glories and desperate longing. She could feel the audience's attention shift, their polite murmurs falling away, replaced by a rapt, almost reverent silence. This wasn't just a performance. It was a plea, a story of survival whispered directly from her soul. And then, as her voice reached its crescendo, a jarring, unwelcome interruption shattered the fragile magic. A man, too casually dressed for the black tie event, swaggered onto the stage from the wings. Silas Thorne. His presence was a blight on the elegant setting, a foul stench in a perfumed room. His tailored suit couldn't hide the predatory gleam in his eyes, the smug curl of his lips. A collective gasp rippled through the audience, quickly followed by an uneasy murmur. Alara's voice caught in her throat, the final, beautiful note dying on her lips, brutally cut short. Her heart plunged into a freezing abyss. No, not now. Not here. Thorne strode confidently to the microphone stand, grabbing it with an almost contemptuous disregard for the delicate instrument. The harsh feedback shrieked through the hall, a piercing assault on the senses. "Ladies and gentlemen," Thorne's voice boomed, thick with arrogance and ill-concealed triumph. "I apologize for interrupting such moving artistry. He let his gaze linger on Alara, a mocking, cruel smile stretching his lips. But it seems I have an important announcement regarding this esteemed establishment. Alara stood frozen, spotlights glaring, her sapphire gown suddenly feeling like a heavy shroud. Her vision blurred at the edges, the faces in the audience becoming indistinguishable blurs of shock and embarrassment. She could feel the heat rising in her cheeks, a flush of humiliation that burned hotter than any stage light. Thorne chuckled, a low, venomous sound. As of midnight tonight, the Starlight Opera House, sadly, will no longer exist. My company has officially acquired the property. The demolition permits have been approved, and a new, much more profitable luxury development will soon rise in its place. The words hit Alara like a physical blow. Demolition. Tonight. The very air seemed to evacuate from her lungs. A collective intake of breath swept through the audience, followed by a confused, angry buzz. This wasn't just an announcement. It was a public execution. Thorne turned back to Alara, his smile widening, savoring her shattered expression. Perhaps our talented singer will find work elsewhere. Or better yet, his eyes dropped, raking over her body in a way that made her skin crawl. Perhaps she could appeal to me directly. The implication was revolting, a vulgar display of power intended to annihilate her spirit. A tremor ran through Alara. The pain was excruciating, 1,000 tiny knives twisting in her gut. Not only was her home, her dream, her parents' legacy being ripped away, but she was being slandered, mocked, humiliated in front of the very people she had hoped to impress. Her carefully constructed facade, her resilience, everything she had built to protect herself and Lily, crumbled in that instant. But then something snapped. A raw, incandescent rage, hotter than any shame, surged through her veins. This wasn't just about the building anymore. This was about respect, about dignity, about every single sacrifice she had made. Her breath tore from her chest. "You can't do this," she cried, her voice ringing out raw and unfiltered, cutting through the stunned silence. She took a step forward, away from the microphone, away from the oppressive light, moving towards Thorne with a fierce, almost desperate energy. "This isn't just property to be bought and sold. This is a monument. History. A home. My home." Her words, though trembling with fury, were loud enough to carry through the suddenly silent auditorium. She met Thorne's amused gaze with her own, now blazing with unyielding defiance. "You think you can just destroy lives? Destroy art? You will not touch this place. You will not touch my family." Thorne merely laughed, a short, sharp bark that held no humor. "Brave words, little songbird. But pretty words won't stop progress. And they certainly won't stop me." Above them all, shrouded in the opulent gloom of the highest VIP box, Damon Volkov watched. His posture was immaculate, almost regal, yet imbued with a dangerous stillness. He hadn't moved a muscle since Thorne's unwelcome appearance. The soft glow of the stage lights didn't quite reach his face, leaving it cloaked in shadow, but the intensity of his gaze was palpable, a predatory heat. He hadn't been interested in the opera, not truly. He'd come as a favor, a rare appearance at a social event. But then, Alara Vance had begun to sing. Her voice, pure and haunting, had stirred something within him, a resonance he hadn't known existed. And now, watching her stand defiantly against Thorne, a man Damon knew to be a troublesome, insignificant parasite in the city's complex ecosystem, a powerful, possessive urge ignited within him. Her anger, her raw, unfettered emotion, the way her small frame pulsed with unyielding courage, even in the face of such overwhelming odds, it was intoxicating. He saw not just a humiliated woman, but a lioness protecting her cub, her territory. And in that moment, as Thorne's crude mockery hung in the air, Damon made a silent, unbreakable vow. "She is mine to protect." His obsidian eyes, usually cold and analytical, now held a deep, burning spark. He watched Alara's every move, memorizing the tremor in her chin, the fire in her eyes, the desperate curve of her lips. She was a fragile beauty caught in a brutal storm, and he, Damon Volkov, would be the only one to command that storm. Without breaking eye contact with the defiant figure on stage, Damon subtly, almost imperceptibly, raised a single hand, a mere flick of his wrist. In the shadows near the rear exit, a massive man in a dark suit, Ivan, Damon's loyal enforcer, nodded once. His pale eyes, sharp and alert, scanned the room, committing faces to memory. He melted back into the shadows, a silent predator awaiting his master's command. Alara, still trembling with rage and despair, felt a sudden, inexplicable chill prickle the back of her neck. A premonition. She barely registered it, her gaze still locked in a fiery battle with Thorn. He was laughing again, a sound that promised her ultimate ruin. But above them, in the dark, a new force had awakened. A silent promise made. A dangerous game about to begin. The Starlight Opera House would fall, but Alara Vance would not. Not if Damon Volkov had anything to say about it. And he had everything to say about it. The dawn that broke over the Starlight Opera House was not the hopeful, golden light Alara had desperately wished for. Instead, it was a harsh, brutal gray, mirroring the leaden weight in her chest. The public humiliation of Thorne's announcement at the gala had barely faded from the air before the eviction notices were nailed to the grand oak doors. City marshals, their faces grim and unyielding, began the methodical process of emptying the theater, their movements a stark, relentless counterpoint to Alara's frantic, desperate pleas. Please, you don't understand. Alara's voice was hoarse, raw from screaming and crying. This is our home. My sister, she has nowhere to go. A burly marshal, his uniform crisp and unyielding, simply shook his head. Orders are orders, ma'am. We've got a warrant for immediate possession. This property is no longer yours. His words were like dull knives, twisting in the fresh wound of her despair. Lily, clutching her worn teddy bear, whimpered softly, her small face buried in Alara's side as the few meager belongings from their backstage apartment were unceremoniously piled onto the damp pavement. The old wooden dresser, Lily's small bed, a stack of sheet music, a chipped teacup, their entire life, lay bare and vulnerable for the world to see. And then Silas Thorne arrived. He emerged from a sleek, black sedan, a dark silhouette against the dreary morning light, his smirk as cruel and triumphant as it had been on stage. He strode towards them, his expensive shoes crunching on the broken glass that now littered the entrance. Well, little songbird, he purred, his voice dripping with false concern. Looks like your beautiful words couldn't save your crumbling castle after all. He paused, letting his gaze crawl over Alara's disheveled form, then down to Lily, making her instinctively recoil further. A shame. Such talent, wasted on sentimentality. Perhaps if you'd been more amenable to my suggestions yesterday, things could have been different. The insidious suggestion hung in the air, a poisonous vapor. Alara's hands clenched into fists, nails digging into her palms. The anger, dormant for a moment under the crushing weight of eviction, flared anew. Get away from us, Thorne, she spat, her voice trembling but fierce. You disgust me. He merely chuckled, a dry, venomous sound. Such fire. Pity it won't keep you warm on the streets. I hear the shelters are full this time of year. Don't worry, I'll send you a postcard from my new luxury complex. He made a dismissive gesture to the marshals, a silent command. Get them out. Now. The feeling of absolute helplessness was suffocating. Alara tightened her grip on Lily, her mind racing, searching for any escape, any alternative. But there was none. The city seemed to swallow them whole, cold and indifferent. Just as the marshals moved to usher them away, a new vehicle pulled up. Not Thorne's flashy sedan, but a discreet, armored SUV, its tinted windows reflecting the bleak sky like dark, unreadable eyes. It parked a short distance away, too close to be coincidence, too far to seem involved. Alara barely registered it, her world narrowing to the terrifying reality of their immediate future. Hours later, huddled with Lily under a thin, damp blanket on a park bench, Alara felt the sting of utter defeat. Lily had finally cried herself to sleep, her tiny body shivering beside Alara's. The opera house, now boarded up and silent, loomed in the distance like a ghost of her ruined dreams. The cold seeped into her bones, but the chill in her heart was far deeper. She had failed. Failed her parents. Failed Lily. Then a sudden, inexplicable gust of wind rustled the newspapers strewn on the ground. A single black rose, impossibly perfect, impossibly dark, tumbled across the damp grass and landed at her feet. Its petals were like polished obsidian, its stem surprisingly robust, with a tiny card tucked into a silken ribbon. Alara's hand trembled as she picked it up, the rose's subtle, earthy scent mingling strangely with the urban decay. On the card, in elegant, bold script, were just 2 words, debt cleared. Her brow furrowed in utter confusion. Debt cleared? What did that even mean? She glanced around, but the park was deserted, save for a few distant figures. No one. She stood up, her heart pounding a frantic rhythm against her ribs. This was too strange, too impossible. Just then, a formidable figure detached itself from the shadows beneath a tall oak tree. Ivan, Damon Volkov's imposing, silent enforcer. He moved with a quiet, menacing grace that belied his size. Alara's breath caught in her throat. Her first instinct was to grab Lily and run, but where would she go? Ivan stopped a few feet from her, his pale eyes, usually unreadable, holding a strange, almost impersonal assessment. He didn't smile. He didn't offer any false comfort. He simply held out a heavy, cream-colored envelope. Miss Vance, his voice was low, gravely, yet held an undeniable authority. Mr. Volkov wishes for you to understand that the Starlight Opera House's outstanding debts have been settled. Permanently, he gestured vaguely back towards the boarded-up building. The demolition permits have been rescinded. The Opera House is saved. Alara stared at him, then at the envelope, then back at the Opera House, her mind struggling to process the impossible. Saved? But how? Who? Mr. Volkov is a man who keeps his promises, Ivan continued, ignoring her questions. He also understands that a home should offer more than just walls. He indicated the envelope. Inside, you will find keys and an address. A new residence. Secure. Discreet. Ready for you and your sister. Alara finally took the envelope, her fingers brushing against the heavy, expensive paper. It felt like a trap. A gilded, opulent cage. A new residence. What does he want in return? Her voice was barely a whisper, thick with suspicion and a dawning, terrifying understanding. Damon Volkov, the man in the VIP box. The one who had watched. Ivan's gaze was steady, unwavering. Mr. Volkov wishes for your safety, for your peace of mind, and for you to continue your work at the Opera House, free from distractions. His eyes flickered to Lily, sleeping soundly, unaware of the dangerous dance her mother was performing. He believes talent should not be wasted on a park bench. A wave of overwhelming emotions crashed over Alara. Relief, terror, gratitude, and a chilling sense of being owned. The Opera House was saved. Lily would have a safe, warm bed. No more cold park benches. No more thorn. But at what cost? This wasn't charity. This was a claim. A statement. Her heart ached with a profound, internal conflict. Her pride screamed to refuse, to fight for her independence, however bleak. But Lily's shivering body, the cold, harsh reality of their situation, silenced those protests. She had no choice. She was truly trapped. Desperation, cold and sharp, forced her hand. Okay, Alara whispered, the word tasting like ash in her mouth. We'll go. A flicker, almost imperceptible, passed through Ivan's eyes. A hint of approval, perhaps. He simply nodded once, a silent command for her to follow. He turned, walking towards the waiting SUV, its dark windows offering no glimpse of the power that lurked within. Alara scooped up Lily, gathering their meager belongings with a sense of fatalistic acceptance. The black rose, a strange, beautiful omen, was still clutched in her hand. She gazed back at the Opera House, no longer a symbol of her struggle, but a monument to an unseen man's power. She was walking into the unknown, into a luxury that felt like a debt, into a safety that felt like a surrender. As she approached the SUV, its engine a silent, menacing purr, she knew one thing with chilling certainty. She had just stepped into Damon Volkov's world, and there was no turning back. This wasn't just a new home. It was a new life, irrevocably bound to a man who had claimed her with a silent vow. The townhouse was less a home and more a palace, a stark contrast to the dust-choked, drafty corners of the Starlight Opera House. Gilded mirrors reflected the opulent chandeliers, their crystals shimmering like frozen tears. Rich, Persian rugs muffled their footsteps, swallowing the familiar creak and groan that had been the soundtrack of Alara's life. The air smelled of aged cedar, polished leather, and faint, exquisite floral scent that whispered of freshly cut orchids. It was a gilded cage, precisely as she'd feared. Lily, however, was in absolute awe. Her eyes, wide with wonder, darted from the sweeping grand staircase to the plush velvet sofas. "Mommy, it's a princess castle," she had exclaimed, her small voice echoing in the cavernous foyer. That pure, unfettered joy was the only reason Alara didn't bolt. She watched Lily chase dust motes in the sunbeams, her laughter ringing out, truly carefree for the first time in what felt like years. And Alara, despite her churning stomach, felt a flicker of grudging relief. At least, for Lily, this was a dream. For Alara, it was a luxurious prison, a debt waiting to be collected. Her initial days were a blur of unease and resistance. Ivan Damon's taciturn right-hand man had shown them to their rooms, a sprawling master suite for Alara, complete with a marble bathroom that felt larger than her entire previous apartment, and an adjoining, brightly decorated room for Lily, overflowing with toys she'd only ever seen in store windows. Meals appeared as if by magic, prepared by unseen hands. Clean clothes, perfectly sized, were laid out each morning. Alara felt like a doll, passively dressed, fed, and housed. Every comfort, every convenience, chafed against her fiercely independent spirit. She tried to assert herself. "I need to go to the opera house," she told Ivan, her voice firm despite the tremor in her hands. "I have responsibilities." Ivan merely gave a slight, unreadable nod. "A driver will take you, Miss Vance. Your schedule has been adjusted. Mr. Volkov believes your focus should be solely on your art." The words were polite, yet held an unmistakable undercurrent of command. Her schedule adjusted? She bristled. Her life was no longer her own, she realized with a fresh wave of chilling clarity. Yet, Damon Volkov remained a phantom. He was the architect of her new reality, the invisible hand guiding her days, but she rarely saw him. His presence was a pervasive shadow, a weight in the air, a constant reminder of the unseen owner of her fate. She'd catch glimpses of him, a dark suit disappearing around a corner, the low murmur of his voice from a distant study, the brief, intense flash of his obsidian eyes in the hallway before he vanished. Each encounter was fleeting, yet left her heart pounding, a strange mix of apprehension and a burgeoning curiosity. One afternoon, Alara discovered a room on the lower level, previously unnoticed. It was a music room, soundproofed and filled with instruments. A grand piano, its polished ebony gleaming, sat like a regal beast in the center. Fresh sheet music, scores she'd only dreamed of performing, were neatly stacked on the stand. A gentle, subtle act of care, entirely unasked for. She ran her fingers over the keys, the cool ivory a stark contrast to the worn, familiar keys of the opera house's old upright. A sigh escaped her, one of relief, gratitude, and a perplexing sense of being understood. He had known. He had anticipated her needs, not with a vulgar display of wealth, but with a quiet, thoughtful provision. It was Lily who truly softened Alara's view, even as her mind waged war with itself. One evening, Alara found Lily sitting on the floor of the grand living room, meticulously drawing in a large sketchbook. Damon was there, too. He sat in a high-backed leather armchair, a financial newspaper held loosely in one hand, but his gaze was fixed on Lily. He wasn't smiling, not exactly, but the sharp angles of his jaw seemed less rigid, his dark eyes less piercing. Lily, completely uninhibited, looked up at him. "Mr. Volkov," she piped, her voice bright and clear, "do you like my drawing of a fire-breathing dragon?" Damon lowered his newspaper, his movements deliberate, unhurried. He took the sketchbook she offered, his large, powerful hand dwarfing her tiny one. He studied the crayon drawing, a fierce, colorful beast. "It has character," he said, his voice a low rumble, surprisingly devoid of his usual commanding tone. "And determination. A good dragon." Lily giggled, a sound that brought an unexpected warmth to Alara's chest. Damon handed the sketchbook back, his fingers brushing Lily's. For a fleeting second, Alara thought she saw a faint, almost melancholy curve to his lips, a ghost of a smile that never fully formed. It was a tiny crack in the impenetrable armor he wore, a glimmer of humanity that Alara hadn't dared to imagine. He wasn't just a ruthless mafia boss. He was a man capable of quiet observation, of gentle interaction, even with a child. Later that week, Alara found herself practicing in the music room. Her voice, freed from the anxieties of survival, soared with newfound power. She was lost in a complex aria, her emotions pouring into every note when she became aware of a presence. She stopped, her heart lurching. Damon stood framed in the doorway, leaning against the archway, his arms crossed over his chest. He was wearing a dark suit, of course, immaculately tailored, but without a tie, the top button of his shirt undone. It was a subtle shift, yet it made him seem less distant, more human. His eyes, dark and unreadable, held hers across the room. There was no judgment, no command in his gaze, only an intense, almost mesmerizing focus. The air between them thickened, charged with an unspoken tension, a palpable hum of undeniable chemistry. "You have a gift, Alara Vance," he said, his voice low, a velvet murmur that resonated deep within her. It wasn't a compliment, but a statement of fact, delivered with the absolute certainty she was beginning to associate with him. "You already paid for it," she retorted, her voice sharper than she intended, a desperate attempt to maintain some semblance of her independence. She hated the way her cheeks flushed, betraying the unexpected heat that sparked at his praise. A faint, almost ghostly smile touched his lips, a fleeting curve that vanished as quickly as it appeared. "Talent is not bought, Alara. It is recognized. Protected." He pushed off the doorway, taking a slow, deliberate step into the room, then another. Each movement was controlled, powerful, yet without aggression. He stopped a few feet from the piano, close enough for her to catch the faint, sophisticated scent of his cologne, something dark, woody, and subtly dangerous. Her pulse quickened. Every fiber of her being screamed apprehension, yet a strange, almost magnetic pull held her in place. She found herself noticing the strength in his broad shoulders, the precise cut of his jaw, the way his dark hair fell slightly across his forehead. This man, the architect of her golden cage, was also undeniably, disturbingly attractive. He extended a hand, not to touch her, but to gently tap a piece of sheet music on the stand. "This passage. The dynamics. You understood the composer's intent perfectly." Alara stared at his hand, then up at his face. His eyes were still fixed on hers, a silent challenge, an unspoken question. She felt a profound, internal conflict. A part of her recoiled from his world, from the implicit ownership, from the cold calculation she knew lay beneath his surface. But another, more primal part, found a confusing sense of security in his presence. He was dangerous, yes, but that danger, she was beginning to realize, was directed outward, shielding her. He was a wall, an unbreakable barrier against the chaotic, predatory world she had barely survived. "Thank you," she managed, the words barely a whisper. The air throbbed with unspoken things. This wasn't just about music anymore. It was about power, about desire, about a connection she both feared and, to her growing dismay, secretly craved. Damon's gaze lingered on her, heavy, possessive, yet with a flicker of something else, a nascent warmth that startled her with its intensity. He nodded slowly, then turned, his figure disappearing from the doorway as silently as he had appeared. Alara was left alone, the echo of his voice, the phantom scent of his cologne, and the unsettling warmth of his gaze lingering in the opulent room. She sat at the piano, her fingers hovering over the keys, but no music came. Her mind was a whirlwind of apprehension and a dawning, unsettling attraction. She was safe, yes, but her heart, her very essence, felt increasingly claimed by the man who pulled her strings from the shadows. And she had no idea what kind of song he intended for her to sing next. The fragile piece Alara had found within the gilded cage of Damon Volkov's townhouse was shattered by a single, chilling discovery. Despite the comfort, the security, the almost suffocating luxury, an insistent, gnawing unease had settled deep in her bones. She needed to see the opera house to confirm with her own eyes that it was truly safe, that Thorne's poisonous words were just that, words. One crisp afternoon, after ensuring Lily was happily engrossed in a new stack of storybooks provided by Damon's staff, Alara had convinced Ivan to drive her to her old apartment. The journey, through familiar streets that now felt alien, was tense. The city outside the armored SUV's tinted windows seemed sharper, colder, a place where danger still lurked despite her new, protected existence. As they approached her old building, a sense of dread, cold and insidious, began to coil in her stomach. The front door of the apartment building, usually worn but sturdy, now hung ajar, its lock splintered. A shiver of foreboding raced down Alara's spine. Ivan, ever watchful, stepped out first, his gaze sweeping the quiet street with practiced intensity. "Stay close, Miss Vance," he murmured, his voice a low rumble. The hallway reeked of stale air, damp plaster, and something else, a sickly sweet scent that made Alara's nose wrinkle in disgust. When Ivan kicked open the door to her old apartment, she gasped. Her small, once sanctuary was utterly devastated. Furniture was overturned, cheap crockery smashed on the floor, clothes ripped and scattered like discarded rags. Lily's tiny drawings, once taped proudly to the refrigerator, were torn to shreds. A can of cheap, vibrant red spray paint lay, discarded on the floor, its nozzle still wet, the acrid chemical smell assaulting her senses. But it was the message, scrawled in angry, jagged red letters across the once pristine white wall of Lily's bedroom, that truly made her blood run cold. You think you're safe? Moretti can't protect you forever. You'll always be mine. Or, the name was a silent scream in her head. The words burned themselves into her vision, a vicious reminder of the predator she thought she had escaped. Her breath hitched, a strangled sound caught in her throat. Her knees threatened to buckle. This wasn't just vandalism. It was a personal, intimate violation. He had been here, in Lily's room. His shadow had touched the very space where her child had slept. A wave of pure, unadulterated fear washed over her, so potent it stole her voice. All the expensive rugs, the endless food, the silent drivers, none of it could erase the image of Thorne's menacing message, his loathsome claim. Despite Damon's formidable presence, the fear for Lily, a primal, visceral terror, resurfaced with brutal force. Ivan, observing her pale face and trembling hands, simply clenched his jaw. He didn't offer sympathy, but his presence, solid and menacing, was a strange comfort. He photographed the damage, his movements precise and efficient, then ushered Alara out with quiet authority. Mr. Volkov will be informed. His tone left no doubt as to the consequences awaiting Thorne. Alara spent the rest of the day in a haze of anxiety. Even the vibrant laughter of Lily, oblivious in her new safe haven, couldn't quite penetrate the lingering chill. Every shadow in the opulent townhouse seemed to twist into Thorne's sneering face. The gilded cage now felt more like a fortress, but one that was constantly under siege by unseen enemies. The irony was bitter. Damon's protection, while keeping her physically safe, also seemed to draw more danger to her. A few days later, a long-planned open house event was held at the Starlight Opera House. It was meant to be a public reopening, a statement of its miraculous revival. Alara, dressed in a simple, elegant gown, greeted city officials and new patrons, her smile feeling brittle. She moved through the familiar halls, now tastefully renovated, trying to project confidence. The scent of fresh paint and polish would replace the old mustiness, a testament to Damon's silent, unfathomable generosity. Then he appeared. Silas Thorne. He strode in through the main doors, flanked by two burly men, his face contorted in a mask of furious indignation. He spotted Alara instantly, his eyes narrowing like a hungry wolf. A ripple of nervous whispers spread through the small crowd. Alara Vance. Thorne's voice boomed, sharp and accusatory, cutting through the polite hum of conversation. There you are. Enjoying your ill-gotten gains, are we? Alara froze, her blood turning to ice. Her heart hammered against her ribs, the familiar dread returning. He wouldn't dare. But he did. Thorne advanced, his gaze a venomous glare. Don't let this woman fool you, ladies and gentlemen, he shouted, gesturing wildly at Alara. She's nothing but a common gold digger, sleeping her way into a rich man's pocket, sacrificing her integrity, her virtue, to keep this crumbling old theater afloat. The words, crude and vile, sliced through the air. Patrons gasped, their faces a mix of shock and morbid curiosity. Alara felt a wave of scalding humiliation wash over her, hotter and more devastating than the first time. Her face flushed crimson, her hands shaking. That's a lie, she cried, her voice thin and trembling. You have no right. No right. Thorne scoffed, taking another step closer, his eyes gleaming with malicious triumph. Everyone knows you latched onto Moretti like a leech. The poor little singer, now a kept woman. What price did you put on your self-respect, Alara? Or was it for the sake of your child? The veiled threat towards Lily was unmistakable, a low blow that stole Alara's breath. Just as Thorne was about to launch into another tirade, a sudden absolute silence fell over the bustling hall. It wasn't just a lull in conversation. It was a palpable hush, as if the very air had stopped moving. Every head turned towards the grand entrance. Damon Volkov stood there. He hadn't made a sound. He simply was. His presence was a force of nature, a silent, unyielding tide that swept through the room, commanding instant, unquestioning attention. He wore a dark, impeccably tailored suit, its lines sharp as a razor, his posture erect, regal. His obsidian eyes, usually so guarded, were now fixed directly on Thorne, burning with a cold, lethal intensity that seemed to drain all color from the developer's face. Thorne, mid-smirk, faltered. His mouth, open to deliver another insult, snapped shut. The confidence, the venomous bravado, visibly drained from him, replaced by stark, bone-chilling terror. He shrunk almost imperceptibly under Damon's unwavering gaze. Damon didn't raise his voice. He didn't need to. He took a slow, deliberate step into the hall, then another, the sound of his expensive shoes unnervingly soft on the polished marble floor. The atmosphere thickened, growing heavy with unspoken threats. He stopped directly in front of Thorn, his towering presence utterly dwarfing the once arrogant man. Silas. Damon's voice was a low, velvet rumble, soft yet unmistakably dangerous. It was a whisper that carried more weight than any shout. I believe we had an understanding. His eyes, cold and sharp, flickered to Alara, then back to Thorn. This property, this woman, they are both under my protection. The word hung in the air, a chilling, possessive declaration. Then his voice dropped even lower, a barely audible hiss that only Thorn and Alara could truly hear. And I don't tolerate anyone disrespecting what belongs to me. You touched her home. You threatened her child. You slandered her name. A muscle in Damon's jaw flexed. Consider this your final warning, Silas. The next time you utter her name or come within a mile of anything I deem mine, you will lose far more than just a property deal. Thorn's face was ashen. Beads of sweat glistened on his forehead. He stammered, trying to find words, but none came. His eyes, wide with sheer, unadulterated terror, darted desperately around the room, searching for an escape. He was utterly, completely broken. Damon leaned in, his voice a final, lethal whisper. Do we understand each other? Thorn nodded frantically, a pathetic, humiliating bob of his head. Why, yes, Mr. Volkov. Perfectly. Damon straightened, his expression returning to its usual controlled mask, though his eyes still held a spark of cold fury. He simply inclined his head, a silent dismissal. Thorn, his bravado utterly annihilated, turned and practically bolted from the opera house, his two burly companions scrambling to follow him, their faces pale. The sudden chaotic exit left an echoing silence in the grand hall. Alara watched him go, her body still trembling, her heart still racing. But the fear, though still present, was now mixed with something new, a profound, awestruck relief, and a chilling realization. She had witnessed Damon Volkov's power, not in a flashy display of violence, but in a quiet, unyielding demonstration of absolute authority. He hadn't touched Thorn, hadn't even raised his voice above a dangerous whisper, yet he had utterly destroyed him. Damon's gaze, cool and collected, settled on Alara. For a fleeting moment, a flicker of something almost tender, almost possessive, softened the sharp edges of his control. He didn't speak, but his message was clear. You are safe. Because you are mine. And in that moment, standing amidst the hushed whispers of the patrons, Alara felt a profound, unsettling shift within her. The initial resistance, the constant fight for her independence, seemed to weaken. A growing sense of dependence, dangerous and undeniable, bloomed in her chest. She was his. And perhaps for the first time, that thought didn't fill her with pure dread, but with a confusing, potent sense of security she had never known. The golden cage had just been reinforced, and she was beginning to understand that its bars, though invisible, were unbreakable. She wondered how deeply into this man's shadow she was willing to fall, for the sake of her own peace and Lily's safety. The aftermath of Thorn's brutal display and Damon's chilling intervention left Alara in a strange, unsettling equilibrium. The fear of Silas Thorn had receded, replaced by a different, more complex emotion, an awestruck, terrifying dependence on Damon Volkov. The opera house was truly safe, its doors now protected by unseen eyes, its finances handled by the silent efficiency of Damon's network. Lily was thriving, her laughter echoing freely through the grand rooms of the townhouse, a sound that finally brought genuine warmth to Alara's heart. Yet, a part of Alara still resisted. Her fierce independence, honed by years of struggle, chafed under the unspoken terms of her protection. She was safe, yes, but at what cost to her autonomy? She felt like a bird with clipped wings, placed in a golden cage more beautiful than she could have ever imagined, yet still a cage. Damon remained an enigma. Their interactions were still infrequent, usually brief exchanges in the living room or study after Lily had gone to bed. He would ask about the opera house, about her rehearsals, his questions precise, his gaze unwavering. Alara, still guarded, would offer clipped, professional answers. But slowly, imperceptibly, the rigid walls she had built around her heart began to soften. One evening, Elara found herself drawn to the study, where Damon often worked late. A warm, inviting glow emanated from beneath the heavy oak door. She hesitated, her hand hovering, before a quiet sigh escaped her. She needed to talk. Not about the opera house, not about logistics, but about the gnawing fear that still sometimes surfaced when she thought of Thorn, about the dreams for Lily that now felt attainable, yet strangely out of her control. She pushed the door open gently. Damon sat at a massive mahogany desk, bathed in the soft, intimate light of a single lamp. Books, bound in worn leather, lined the shelves behind him, and the rich scent of old paper, pipe tobacco, and his familiar, dangerous cologne filled the air. He looked up, his obsidian eyes meeting hers, a flicker of something she couldn't decipher, perhaps surprise, perhaps a rare moment of unguarded curiosity. "Elara," he said, his voice a low, gravelly rumble that always sent a subtle tremor through her. "Is everything all right?" "Yes," she began, then hesitated, her gaze dropping to her clasped hands. "No, not entirely." She walked further into the room, stopping before the grand fireplace where a small, cheerful fire crackled, casting dancing shadows on the high walls. The warmth on her face was a welcome contrast to the chill in her heart. I just needed to." She trailed off, searching for words. How did one confess to the man who owned your life that you were terrified of him, and yet profoundly grateful? Damon merely watched her, his silence not accusatory, but a vast, patient space, inviting her to fill it. "Thorn, his words still haunt me," she finally admitted, her voice barely above a whisper. "The way he looked at Lily, the threats. I thought I could protect her. I thought I was strong enough. But I wasn't." A single tear, hot and unbidden, traced a path down her cheek. "I've been so afraid for so long. For her. For the opera house. And then you stepped in. And now they're safe. But I feel like I'm still falling." She turned to face him, her eyes wide and vulnerable, pleading for an understanding she wasn't sure he possessed. "I want Lily to have a future. A real one. Where she can dance on that stage, just like she dreams. Not to be constantly looking over her shoulder. Not to be burdened by the mistakes of her mother." Damon rose from his desk, his movements slow, deliberate, each step commanding the space. He stopped a few feet from her, his presence utterly consuming. The heat from the fire, the subtle scent of his cologne, the sheer overwhelming power emanating from him, it all converged, tightening the air around them. "You speak of mistakes," Damon said, his voice low, his eyes fixed on hers. "There are no mistakes in protecting what is yours. Only choices. And you chose to fight for your child, for your dream. That is not weakness, Elara. That is strength." He lifted a hand, and for a terrifying, exhilarating moment, Elara thought he would touch her face. Instead, his fingers brushed a stray strand of hair from her cheek, a touch so light, so tender, it felt like an electric current. Her breath hitched. The air between them crackled with an almost unbearable tension. His gaze dropped to her lips for a fleeting instant, a spark of untamed desire igniting in his dark eyes, before returning to hers. "You feared you couldn't protect her," he continued, his voice a low murmur, "because you were trying to fight a war you were not equipped for. You fought alone. You don't have to anymore." Elara swallowed hard, her throat suddenly dry. "And you fight these wars every day?" A muscle in Damon's jaw tightened, almost imperceptibly. His eyes, usually so guarded, held a flicker of something raw, something ancient. "My world is not a place for sentiment, Elara. It is a world of shadows and steel. A world of debts and retribution. There are costs." His gaze drifted to the fire, its flickering flames reflecting a profound, almost melancholy weariness in his eyes. "Losses," he added, the word heavy with unspoken pain. "Everyone pays a price for power. For control. Sometimes the highest price is paid in silence, in what you cannot have, in what you lose along the way." It wasn't a confession, not a detailed story, but a controlled, revealing glimpse into the scarred landscape of his own heart. The loneliness of command, the burdens of absolute power. Elara stared at him, suddenly seeing beyond the intimidating mafia boss, beyond the impenetrable facade. She saw a man burdened by immense responsibility, shaped by a world of darkness, perhaps carrying wounds far deeper than her own. The realization was stunning, and it twisted something in her chest. "Do you ever regret it?" she whispered, daring to ask, her voice soft, tentative. Damon's gaze snapped back to hers, sharp and intense. A profound silence stretched between them, punctuated only by the crackle of the fire. Then he shook his head, a slow, deliberate movement. Regret is a luxury I cannot afford. I regret only when my actions have failed to secure what is mine. His eyes held hers, a silent, unyielding possessiveness in their depths. And now, Alara, you and Lily are mine to secure. That is not a regret. His words, a blunt declaration of ownership, should have chilled her. Yet, in that moment, hearing the raw honesty, seeing the fleeting vulnerability in his gaze, a strange, powerful connection formed between them. It was a shared understanding of burdens, of sacrifices, of the unyielding will to protect. Alara felt a subtle, almost magnetic pull towards him, an acknowledgement that despite their vastly different worlds, their scarred hearts held a similar resonance. She reached out, her hand rising almost instinctively, her fingers brushing the dark, smooth fabric of his suit jacket just above his arm. It was a tentative, tender gesture, a silent offering of comfort, of recognition. Damon's eyes widened almost imperceptibly, his body tensing, then slowly relaxing under her touch. The air thrummed with unspoken emotions, with a burgeoning, dangerous seeds of love. "Thank you, Damon," she whispered, her voice thick with emotion, "for saving us." His hand, large and strong, covered hers on his jacket, a firm, possessive squeeze that sent a jolt through her. His gaze, once weary, now burned with a rekindled intensity, a deep, consuming fire. "Always, Alara," he murmured, his voice rough, thick with something profound and unspoken. In that shared silence, surrounded by the warmth of the fire and the weight of their confessions, Alara knew, with a certainty that both thrilled and terrified her, that her heart was no longer entirely her own. It was tethered to his, bound by shared sorrows and a dangerous, blossoming attraction. But even as this terrifying new connection solidified, a cold dread began to creep in. For if their bond deepened, what new unforeseen dangers would it bring from his shadowy world? The Starlight Opera House hummed with a vibrant, almost miraculous energy. Tonight was the grand premiere of Alara's first major production as artistic director, a reimagined classic that had critics buzzing. The renovations, overseen by Damon's silent, efficient team, had restored the theater to its former glory, and then some. The air was alive with the excited chatter of patrons, the rustle of programs, and the eager tuning of the orchestra. Alara, dressed in a stunning gown of deep emerald, felt a fragile sense of triumph bloom in her chest. She stood backstage, the familiar stage lights a warm embrace, not the blinding interrogation they once felt. Lily, bright-eyed and beaming in a miniature velvet dress, clung to her hand, occasionally peeking out from behind the curtain. Damon had been present earlier, a dark, commanding presence in her dressing room. His eyes, usually so guarded, had held a flicker of pride, a quiet acknowledgement of her achievement. "You were born for this, Alara," he had murmured, his voice a low rumble, his thumb brushing lightly, possessively, across the back of her hand. That small, unexpected gesture had sent a warmth spreading through her, a confusing mix of apprehension and a deep, unbidden comfort. She had started to truly believe the Golden Cage might just be a sanctuary after all. "Mommy, it's starting," Lily whispered excitedly, tugging on her hand. Alara knelt, kissing her daughter's forehead. "Stay with Mrs. Petrova in the box, sweetheart. Mommy will be out there soon." Mrs. Petrova, a kindly, stern woman from Damon's staff, nodded reassuringly from a discreet corner. Alara watched Lily skip away, a tiny, vibrant splash of innocence in a world that had once threatened to consume them both. For the first time in years, Alara felt truly safe, truly at peace. It was a feeling as intoxicating as it was dangerous, a testament to the man who had woven his shadow around them. The curtain rose. The opening act, a delicate ballet sequence, unfolded flawlessly. Alara watched from the wings, a serene smile gracing her lips. This was her life now. Protected, cherished, finally hers. Then a sudden jarring shift. The low hum of conversation from the audience became a distinct murmur, then an uneasy buzz. Lights, not part of the production, flared in the back of the auditorium. A wave of unease, cold and insidious, began to creep up Alara's spine. Her smile faltered. Three figures, stern-faced and unyielding, strode down the center aisle, their uniforms stark against the opulent setting. Police. Alara's breath hitched. Her heart began to pound, a frantic, terrified drum against her ribs. No, not again. She looked desperately towards Damon's usual VIP box, but it was dark, empty. A wave of panic, raw and visceral, threatened to overwhelm her. The lead officer, a tall, imposing woman with sharp eyes, stopped directly in front of the stage. Her voice, amplified by the sudden, chilling silence of the audience, cut through the expectant hush like a knife. "Alara Vance," she announced, her voice ringing with formal authority. "We have a warrant for your arrest." Alara swayed, gripping the velvet curtain for support. Her blood ran cold. "Arrest?" The word echoed in her mind, a terrifying, unbelievable pronouncement. What are you talking about?" she stammered, her voice a reedy whisper. "Alara Vance, you're under arrest for embezzlement and fraudulent misappropriation of funds from the Starlight Opera House," the officer continued, completely ignoring Alara's protest. "You have the right to remain silent. Anything you say can and will be used against you in a court of law." The words blurred. Embezzlement? Fraud? Her? It was a sick, cruel joke. She had poured every ounce of her blood, sweat, and tears into this place, fought tooth and nail to save it. The accusation was grotesque, a direct assault on her integrity, her very soul. A wave of gasps and shocked murmurs swept through the audience. Alara could feel their eyes on her, thousands of judging, curious gazes. The shame, scalding and overwhelming, burned her cheeks. Her legs felt like lead, rooted to the spot. "This is insane," Alara finally managed, her voice cracking. "I would never. This is a lie. A setup." She knew instinctively who was behind it. Or his revenge, orchestrated with malicious precision. But the officer was unmoved. "We have substantial evidence, Miss Vance. Bank records, forged invoices, large sums of money transferred into offshore accounts linked to your name." Offshore accounts? Forged invoices? The sheer audacity of it left her reeling. This was so much more intricate, so much more insidious than any of Thorne's previous threats. It was designed to utterly annihilate her. Suddenly, a small, terrified cry pierced the stunned silence. "Mommy! Mommy, what's happening?" Alara's head snapped towards the VIP box. Lily. Her small face was pressed against the glass, tears streaming down her cheeks, her wide, innocent eyes filled with confusion and sheer terror. Mrs. Petrova tried to pull her back, but Lily was frantic, her tiny hands beating against the glass. "They're taking Mommy." "No. Mommy." The sight of Lily's distress was a physical blow, a pain far sharper than any accusation. It ripped through Alara, tearing apart the fragile sense of security she had just begun to embrace. "This is Damon's world," a chilling voice whispered in her mind. "This is what his protection brings. More danger, more public shame, more terror for Lily." A bitter, searing resentment, a sense of profound betrayal, began to fester in her heart. Two officers moved towards the stage. Alara stumbled backward, desperately shaking her head. "No, you can't. My daughter, she needs me." "Miss Vance, cooperate," the lead officer commanded, her voice hardening. Just then, a figure emerged from the backstage area. Ivan. His face was a mask of cold fury, his pale eyes burning with a dangerous light. He moved towards Alara, his huge frame radiating a silent, lethal threat. "Stop this." Ivan's voice was a low growl, directed at the officers. "Miss Vance is under the protection of Mr. Volkov. You have no authority here." The lead officer scoffed. "Mr. Volkov's name means nothing to a legitimate police investigation, especially involving fraud of this magnitude. Step aside, sir, or you'll be arrested for obstruction." Ivan hesitated, his jaw clenching. He glanced towards the back of the auditorium, a silent plea, a desperate search. But Damon was still nowhere to be seen. A look of grim, frustrated rage crossed his features. He couldn't engage the police directly without risking a full-blown war on Damon's territory, a move that would expose too much too soon. "Mommy!" Lily's scream tore through the air again, more heartbroken than before. Alara's gaze met Ivan's, her eyes blazing with a mix of fear, anger, and a terrible, dawning realization. Where is Damon? Why isn't he here? He promised to protect us. The silent question hung between them, a chasm of doubt opening in her heart. The officers were on the stage now, their hands reaching for her. Alara recoiled, but it was useless. Strong hands gripped her arms, twisting them behind her back. The cold metal of handcuffs clicked into place, a sound that resonated with the finality of her public downfall. She felt exposed, vulnerable, utterly annihilated. As she was roughly led away, past the shocked, whispering faces of the audience, past the glittering chandeliers that now seemed to mock her misery, Alara's eyes darted frantically to the VIP box where Lily was sobbing, a tiny, crumpled figure of despair. Her heart broke into a million pieces. "Lily, it's okay, baby. Mommy will be back," Alara cried, her voice raw, but her words were swallowed by the rising murmur of the crowd, the click of cameras, the flash of phone lights. She was a spectacle, a ruined woman. And then, just as she was being escorted out, a dark figure finally appeared in the main entrance. Damon. He stood frozen, his eyes black as obsidian, sweeping across the chaotic scene, Alara in handcuffs, the officers, Lily's distraught face in the box. A silent, lethal rage, cold and absolute, contorted his features. He had been delayed, drawn away by a treacherous false lead, orchestrated by Thorn. He felt a searing, unbearable failure. He had promised to protect her, to never let her fall, and now. Alara's eyes met his across the crowded, bustling foyer. Her gaze, filled with tears and the bitter sting of betrayal, held a silent, accusing question. "You promised. You failed me. You failed Lily." The trust, the burgeoning love, the fragile sense of security she had finally allowed herself to feel, it all crumbled, replaced by a devastating surge of hopelessness and a desperate, agonizing sense of being utterly alone. Damon's jaw clenched, a muscle working furiously. His fists, hidden in the pockets of his impeccable suit, were clenched so tightly his knuckles were white. The world around him faded into a meaningless blur. All he saw was Alara, being dragged away, her spirit broken, her faith in him shattered. He had vowed to shield her from the shadows, but now those very shadows from his world had reached out and claimed her in the most public, humiliating way possible. His cold fury was boundless, but beneath it lay a profound, gnawing self-reproach. He had underestimated Thorn, and Alara was paying the price. As the police car pulled away, its sirens wailing a mournful, devastating symphony into the night, Alara pressed her face against the cold glass, tears blurring her vision. She saw Damon, standing like a statue in the glittering entrance of the opera house, his figure silhouetted against the bright lights, appearing as distant and unreachable as the stars. He had brought her into his dangerous world, and now she was paying the ultimate price. She was utterly alone, in an abyss far deeper than any she had known before, questioning everything she had begun to believe. And the darkest thought of all chilled her to the bone. Would Damon Volkov truly come for her, or had she finally become a liability, a consequence of his own shadowed game? The chill of the holding cell was nothing compared to the icy despair that had settled deep within Alara's bones. The accusations, the public shame, Lily's terrified screams, it all replayed in a cruel, relentless loop. Damon. He hadn't been there. His promise, his supposed protection, had felt like a betrayal that cut deeper than any knife. She was alone, utterly vulnerable, and the gilded cage had become a stark, concrete box. Her lowest point wasn't the hard bench or the stale air. It was the moment she heard the footsteps. Not the guards, but unfamiliar, heavy boots. The door clanged open, revealing not a police officer, but two of Thorn's burly, menacing men. Their smiles were chilling, predatory. "Looks like your rich protector couldn't keep you locked up for long, little songbird." One sneered, his breath reeking of stale cigarettes. "Boss wants a private chat." Fear, cold and visceral, seized Alara. This was it. Thorn's revenge. The system had failed her, and Damon was absent. She tried to fight, but her strength was nothing against their brute force. Her pleas were swallowed by the echoing corridors as they dragged her out, shoving her into the back of a nondescript van that smelled faintly of oil and decay. The city lights blurred through the grimy windows, her heart pounding a frantic, terrified rhythm against her ribs. She was truly alone now, a pawn snatched from one dark hand to another. Meanwhile, in the sterile high-tech command center hidden beneath his townhouse, Damon Volkov moved like a force of nature. The news of Alara's transfer, a blatant, corrupt abduction orchestrated by Thorn, had ignited a cold, annihilating fury within him. His usual composure, his calculated control, had fractured, replaced by a singular, lethal focus. He had failed her, allowed her to be touched. And that was an unforgivable sin. Status. Damon's voice was a low growl, devoid of any discernible emotion, yet it sent shivers down the spines of his most seasoned men. He stood before a wall of monitors, his eyes black as a winter storm, tracking every digital footprint, every intercepted communication. Ivan, his face a grim mask, pointed to a flickering on a digital map. The van's tracker activated. It's moving east, Mr. Volkov, towards the old industrial district, near the abandoned docks. Thorne's territory. Damon's jaw clenched, a muscle working furiously. Assemble every available unit. Priority low. Engage. Eliminate. Bring her back. Undamaged. His voice was a promise of absolute, merciless retribution. And Thorne, he's mine. Within minutes, the silent, efficient machinery of Damon's empire roared to life. Armored vehicles, indistinguishable from civilian SUVs, sped through the city. His men, a highly trained, lethal force, moved with silent precision, their faces grim, their weapons ready. Damon, his own tailored suit now concealing a silenced pistol, led the charge. His failure had cost Alara her safety. He would repay that debt in blood. Alara found herself in a sprawling, dilapidated warehouse. The air was thick with the scent of rust, damp concrete, and fear. Her wrists were bound to a metal chair, the rough ropes chafing against her skin. Dust motes danced in the slivers of weak moonlight that pierced the grimy skylights high above. Thorne stood before her, his face a mask of triumphant malice, a half-empty bottle of expensive whiskey clutched in his hand. Thought you were safe, did you, Alara? He slurred, taking a large gulp. Hiding behind her mafia puppet? Well, puppets get cut loose. And now you're back where you belong. Mine. He stalked closer, his breath hot and foul on her face. You think you're special. You're just a pawn, a tool. And when Volkov falls, and he will, you'll be the first to break. Terror, raw and unfettered, choked Alara. He was going to hurt her. She closed her eyes, trying to conjure Lily's face, trying to find strength, but despair was a suffocating blanket. Damon, where are you? Her mind screamed a question, but her heart no longer believed in an answer. Suddenly, a distant, muffled explosion rocked the warehouse, sending a tremor through the concrete floor. Thorne stumbled, dropping his bottle, which shattered with a deafening crash. His eyes, wide with confusion and a dawning fear, darted towards the main entrance. Then, a flurry of rapid, silenced gunshots tore through the night outside. Shouts, short and brutal, echoed from beyond the reinforced metal doors. The air instantly thickened with a metallic tang of fear. Thorne's face, moments ago smug, now contorted in a mask of sheer terror. Volkov, he shrieked, his voice laced with unadulterated panic. He's here. How? The metal doors to the warehouse burst inward with a deafening screech, ripped from their hinges. Debris flew across the vast space. Smoke, thick and acrid, billowed into the room. Figures, dark and lethal, poured in, moving with terrifying speed and precision. Damon Volkov stood framed in the wreckage of the doorway, a terrifying silhouette against the chaos. His dark suit was immaculate, untouched by the brutal efficiency of the assault. But his eyes were a storm of pure, unadulterated rage, black and unforgiving, fixed with unwavering intensity on Alara. And on Thorne. Silas. Damon's voice was a low, predatory growl that seemed to vibrate through the very foundations of the warehouse. It was a sound of absolute dominance, a promise of merciless retribution. You touched what is mine. Thorne, his face ghostly pale, tried to scramble backward, tripping over his own feet. Volkov, wait. We can talk. I was just... Damon didn't pause. He moved, not with a frantic charge, but with a lethal, orchestrated grace, weaving through the chaos of his men neutralizing Thorne's remaining goons. His presence was a blight on the darkness, a magnet for violence. He walked directly to Thorne, his gaze never leaving the cowering man, his hand, quick as a viper, pulling a gleaming silenced pistol from beneath his jacket. Alara watched, paralyzed, a mix of terror and frantic hope surging through her. Damon was here. He had come. But the raw, unfettered savagery emanating from him was almost as terrifying as Thorne himself. You thought you could break her? Damon's voice was a whisper, but it sliced through the air with the sharpness of a honed blade. He leveled the pistol, not at Thorne's head, but at his kneecap. You thought you could take what belongs to me. Fool. A single, muffled shot cracked the air. Thorne screamed, a guttural, agonizing sound as his leg buckled. He collapsed to the floor, clutching his injured knee, his face contorted in a mask of unbearable pain and abject terror. Damon stood over him, an avenging angel cloaked in darkness. "This is a message, Silas," he said, his voice cold, devoid of mercy. "A message to anyone who dares to threaten what I claim. Opera House is hers. Lily is hers. And you are nothing." He flicked his wrist, and Ivan, appearing like a silent shadow, seized Thorn, dragging him away, his terrified cries quickly fading into the distance. His punishment, Alara knew, would be far worse than a single gunshot. Damon turned, his eyes immediately locking onto Alara. The cold, lethal mask that had consumed him began to soften, just barely, as he registered her terror, her bound wrists. He holstered his weapon, his gaze intense, possessive, yet filled with a profound, undeniable relief. He moved swiftly, his powerful hands untying the rough ropes that bound her, his fingers brushing against her raw skin. "Alara," he murmured, his voice rough, thick with something akin to desperation. He pulled her gently from the chair, drawing her against his broad, solid chest. The scent of gunpowder and his dangerous cologne mingled, a strangely comforting, intoxicating blend. His arms wrapped around her, fierce, protective, possessive. "I promised you. Nothing touches you. Nothing touches Lily." His lips, soft and urgent, found her hair, then her temple. Alara clung to him, her body trembling uncontrollably, tears of overwhelming relief streaming down her face. His presence was a fortress, a solid, unyielding anchor in the storm of her terror. The feeling of his arms around her, the powerful beat of his heart against her ear, it was a declaration, more profound than any words, of his absolute ownership, his fierce protection. The betrayal, the doubt, the despair, it all dissolved, replaced by a searing dark passion that ignited in her soul. He had come for her. He had saved her. She looked up at him, her eyes, still wet with tears, meeting his. His face, still etched at the aftermath of his unleashed fury, softened further, his gaze burning with an intensity that promised forever. "Damon," she whispered, her voice choked with emotion. "I." But before she could speak, he lowered his head, his lips capturing hers in a kiss that was raw, demanding, and utterly consuming. It was a kiss of triumph, of possession, of a dark, unyielding love. It was a promise, forged in chaos and danger, that she was irrevocably, absolutely his. And as his world of shadows closed around them, Alara knew, with a certainty that both thrilled and terrified her, that she finally belonged. But even as the relief washed over her, a chilling question lingered in the back of her mind. What other dark corners of his world would she have to face, now that she was truly claimed? The journey back to Damon's townhouse was a blur of adrenaline and exhaustion. Alara clung to him in the back of the armored UV, her body trembling uncontrollably, the faint scent of gunpowder and Thorn's fear still clinging to her clothes. Damon held her, a silent, unyielding fortress, his arms wrapped tightly around her, his chin resting on her head. His presence was a tangible comfort, a shield against the horrors she had just witnessed. Lily, oblivious to the specific brutality, but sensing her mother's distress, was already tucked safely in her room, soothed by Mrs. Petrova. Back in the opulent living room of the townhouse, bathed in the soft, warm glow of a roaring fireplace, Alara finally collapsed onto a plush sofa. Her legs felt like jelly, her mind replaying the image of Thorn's terrified face, his agonizing scream. The metallic tang of fear and violence lingered on her tongue. Damon knelt before her, his hands gently cupping her face, his thumb brushing away a stray tear. His eyes, though still dark and intense, held a profound concern, a rare softness that pierced through his usual impenetrable facade. "Are you hurt, Mia Bella?" His voice was a low, rough murmur, laced with a raw tenderness she hadn't heard before. Alara shook her head, tears silently streaming down her face. "Just scared and relieved." So relieved. She looked into his eyes, her own wide and still filled with the lingering echoes of terror. "Thorn, what will happen to him?" Damon's jaw tightened, a hard, unyielding line. The softness in his eyes hardened, replaced by a cold, absolute resolve. "He will pay, Alara. Not just for tonight. For every insult, every threat, every moment of fear he inflicted upon you and Lily." His voice was low, but laced with a lethal promise. "He will lose everything. His reputation, his wealth, his freedom. And then he will vanish into a place where shadows consume even the memory of men like him." The words, brutal and unforgiving, sent a shiver down Alara's spine. It was a promise of complete, merciless retribution, delivered with the chilling calm of a man who wielded absolute power. She knew, with unwavering certainty, that Damon would keep his word. Thorn would not just be punished, he would be erased. A part of her recoiled from the sheer ruthlessness, but another, primal part, felt a deep, savage satisfaction. Justice, in Damon's world, was absolute. He rose, then gently scooped her into his arms, carrying her effortlessly. Alara didn't resist, her head resting against his strong shoulder, the rhythmic beat of his heart a steady anchor against her own frantic pulse. He carried her to her bedroom, a room that now felt like a true sanctuary. He sat her on the edge of the bed, then knelt again, pulling off her shoes with a surprising tenderness. Rest now, he commanded softly. Sleep. The shadows have retreated. You are safe. Both of you. He gently tucked her under the soft silk duvet, his large hand brushing her hair from her forehead. His touch, usually so controlled, held a faint tremor, a testament to the intensity of his own relief. Damon, Alara whispered, reaching out to grasp his hand. Thank you. For everything. His gaze met hers, deep and intense. You are mine to protect, Alara, he murmured, his voice a low, possessive vow. Always. He stayed by her side, a silent, unwavering sentinel, until exhaustion finally claimed her, pulling her into a deep, dreamless sleep. The days that followed were a testament to Damon's formidable reach. News reports, carefully curated, painted Thorn as a corrupt, disgraced businessman, entangled in a web of embezzlement and illicit dealings that stretched far beyond the opera house. His assets were frozen, his properties seized, his name dragged through the mud with a swiftness and thoroughness that left no doubt as to the puppet master pulling the strings. Thorn himself simply vanished from public record, his fate a silent, chilling mystery, whispered only in the darkest corners of the city. He was a cautionary tale, a permanent fixture in the shadows, a man who had dared to touch what belonged to Damon Volkov. Alara found a strange, cathartic peace in the retribution. The anxiety that had plagued her for so long began to recede, replaced by a profound sense of closure. She watched the opera house reopen its doors, truly hers now, a symbol not of past struggle, but of a new, fiercely protected future. The renovation was completed, the grand stage ready for her voice to soar, unburdened by fear. Damon's presence in their lives became a seamless, integral part of their new reality. He was always there, quiet, powerful force. He would spend evenings in the study, but sometimes Alara would find him watching Lily as she played, a rare, almost tender smile gracing his lips. He would bring Alara rare scores, books on opera history, small, thoughtful gifts that showed he saw beyond the singer, into her heart and mind. One evening, after Lily had fallen asleep, Alara found Damon on the terrace, gazing out at the glittering city skyline. The air was cool, carrying the distant hum of traffic. She walked to his side, wrapping a soft shawl around her shoulders. It's beautiful, isn't it? She murmured, gazing at the sprawling metropolis, no longer a source of threat, but a vibrant backdrop to their newfound peace. Damon turned to her, his eyes dark as midnight, reflecting the city lights. Peace is a fragile thing, Alara, he said, his voice low. Especially in this city. But for you, for Lily, it will be absolute. He reached out, his hand gently cupping her cheek, his thumb brushing softly against her skin. His touch sent a shiver of both longing and absolute security through her. My world is one of shadows, he continued, his gaze intense, possessive. But those shadows will now be your shield. A fortress built for you. For your music. For Lily's laughter. His hand slid down to intertwine with hers, his grip firm, unyielding. There will be no more fear. No more running. Only the life you deserve. And you will never face it alone. Not while I breathe. It was an absolute, unambiguous declaration of his commitment, his ownership. Alara's heart, once so guarded, now swelled with a complex mixture of gratitude, awe, and a burgeoning, consuming love. She was no longer just protected. She was claimed, bound to this dangerous, powerful man who had carved out a sanctuary for her in his dark world. The golden cage had transformed, not into a prison, but into a sacred space, fiercely guarded by a love as profound as it was dangerous. She leaned into him, resting her head on his shoulder, a profound sense of belonging settling over her. But even in this newfound peace, a question soft and insistent bloomed in her heart. He had given her everything, safety, dreams, a love unlike any other. What more could he possibly want? What ultimate, irrevocable price would she pay for this absolute peace, this dangerous, undeniable love? Sometimes, the heaviest burdens we carry aren't seen, but felt: the weight of public shame, the silent terror for those we love, the haunting whisper that our past defines our worth. Alara's journey, rising from humiliation and despair, shows us that true strength isn't about fighting alone, but finding the courage to accept protection, to embrace a love that sees your deepest scars and claims them as part of your beautiful, resilient spirit. If this tale of dark love and unwavering protection resonated with a fierce heart within you, if it reminded you that your past does not dictate your destiny, then join our community. Like this video, subscribe for more stories where untamed love conquers all, and in the comments below, declare, "I am claimed by hope."